Over the summer, we saw protests across the country fighting for racial justice. In part 2 of a two-part series, we'll continue to examine how we can improve race relations here in Nevada. That's this week on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstadt and additional supporting sponsors.
This summer, thousands took to the streets across the nation protesting police brutality and systemic racism. The scene in Las Vegas was no different. After the crowds dispersed, we sat down with cultural leaders, educators, activists, and academics to discuss what needs to change. Across the board, we heard time and time again that Southern Nevada needs to address the school-to-prison pipeline. Last week, in part 1 of this two-part conversation, we broke down the history and root causes of the school-to-prison pipeline. This week, for part 2, we'll look ahead to potential solutions. In some of the interviews that we've done, there's talk about where entry to the criminal justice system starts. And maybe you can give me your perception of that. Exactly, is that the first maybe referral, even if it's for behavioral issues in school? What stage do we get to that?
I would argue that the entry into the juvenile justice system or the criminal justice system starts long before the child even enters school. We're talking pre-K, ages 3 and 4. When a child is not prepared or armed with the appropriate tools to be successful in school, they tend to fall behind. When a child falls behind and left to their own devices oftentimes, or with parents that are not armed to arm them appropriately with the skills that are necessary to be successful in school, I believe that fall off starts relatively early in a child's life.
We've had little kids that have come to us in elementary school that have been handcuffed, which is, to me, is just appalling. I don't think any young child should ever be handcuffed. And that's where if you're talking about disproportionality, that's where we've really seen it, is the law enforcement approach to some of our ethnic groups is unacceptable, especially young children, because you change their belief and how they see the police for the rest of their lives. If you handcuff a 10-year-old, you've changed their outlook on the police and what is justice and what is law enforcement, because their brains aren't even developed yet. They don't understand why they're being handcuffed.
We've had a couple of 3-year-olds. Yep, crawling all over their moms. It's kind of a cute sight for us. We see these little babies crawling around and walking around here, but yeah, we've had 3-year-olds. And let's face it, there's not a 3-year-old out there with a knife or a gun. This is a parenting issue. This is oftentimes, a struggle, and not necessarily a parenting issue that sheds a bad light on a parent that's really struggling. But oftentimes it's an education issue. It's an access to resource issue. It's getting that parent taught how to be a parent. There's no manual that came with any of my sons. So, it's teaching them how to parent, helping their children, helping them help themselves. The greatest part about the harbor is it's open to any child is 0 to 18. I remember the first time I saw a young child here, because when we designed it for 15-year-old kids that were having, problems in school. That was how naive we were, that we forgot that 3-year-olds become 4-year-olds, become 5-year-olds, all with the same struggles. And so this is really open. You can be referred here by your pastor. You can be brought here by a school police. The local police department can bring you. Parents can bring you. And we've also had children that have recognized their own downward spiral into trouble and have walked themselves in here and asked for help. The harbor was created in 2016. We created it in juvenile justice because we had over 25,000 referrals into the juvenile justice system. And put it in comparison, the similar size, not even a similar size system, the New York system is 5 times our size and had 8,000 kids that were referred into their system. We were doing something wrong. We were catching a lot of kids inside of our system that were did not rise to the level of criminality that belonged on probation. And we were doing them a disservice. We were capturing kids on in these criminal justice systems, caught in these nets, and then we weren't giving them a pathway out of them. And the best way, all the research tells us that the best way to deal with the criminal justice system is not ever enter the criminal justice system. So we started the harbor with just that design, and to help the school district with 320,000 students here, to help them address negative behaviors at the earliest onset that we could, The sooner we get to the behavior, the sooner we can get it rectified and get the child being successful in school.
So let's talk about then the mental health aspect to this and what resources you provide here. For one thing, how important is mental health and the resources at a place like the Harbor to what you're trying to do?
Well, getting an accurate assessment of where a child's at, first of all, is the most important piece. What are the actual stressors or problems that are coming with this child inside the door? Oftentimes, maybe it's not mental health of the child, but it's mental health of somebody in the house or substance abuse of somebody in the house. But absolutely, mental health issues are an issue. They're an issue here, and the second part of that is the funding that goes with mental health issues, right? In terms of how Medicaid funds that, and then finding vetted providers that can provide the services, right? So yeah, mental health issues are definitely real.
Most of our kids in Las Vegas, or a lot of them, are coming to school with various issues. And so our schools need to be trauma informed and trauma responsive for every child that walks in that door. I think it creates healthier children, and it's just a better approach. And we have heard schools say, yes, I'm trauma informed, I'm trauma responsive, but what does that really mean? I mean, I'd like to see more of a curriculum in every school. I think we need to have social emotional learning in school, a curriculum devoted to help kids resolve conflict. I think we need to have strong restorative justice programs in school. Suspending and expelling children is not the solution. It just creates the problem, and it just exacerbates the problem. So we need to have strong programs in schools that catch these kids before they even get to the level of where they're sent to juvenile justice. That comes through proper screening and services that they provide to help these kids be successful, services to the family, supports to the family, and so forth. It really, you have to go back in time. I mean, by the time they come to us, it's been a year of troublesome behavior or concerning behavior, and not a lot of intervention. And so it's really about intervention. There's a lot of studies out there that talk about the relationship between trauma and learning disabilities, trauma and behavior. And so we really need to back it up and make sure that our kids are coming to school with healthy coping skills.
I think the major investment where we need to start is looking at our ratio of counselors and social workers and those who can provide therapeutic services to young people. The recommendation for counselors, the recommended ratio is 250 students for every one counselor. That's nationwide. We're at 441 for every one counselor. Social workers is even more abysmal. It's also recommended that there be one counselor for every 250 students. We're 8,730 to every one social worker in schools. So I think there is, a glaring problem that we should really look at to fix. If we really stop and make that investment, it solves the school safety issue. It solves that early intervention. It really gets to the heart of why young people have so much interaction with school disciplinary folks, including police officers, at such an early age.
When I was coming through the district, we had anywhere from 0 to 20 social workers for a district of 300,000 plus. It's only been within the last 6 years that funding came down for social workers. I know when I left the district, we were over 250 from 20 for decades. Yet we're seeing kids with bigger, greater mental health issues than ever before. If we don't address those mental health issues, how can we expect that behavior is going to be regulated on its own? If a child's dealing with mental health, they're not generally able to monitor and control their own behavior.
I want teachers to be able to focus on teaching, and I think we put a lot on teachers to be sort of jack of all trades, and I think it's having the right supports in school, also having school social workers that are trained in de-escalation. Every school should have that type of team that can intervene, especially our schools that have high needs. I think Clark County calls the police or calls CCSD police because they don't know what else to do. And so we need to get them tools so that they have a whole, a wide array of resources to use before it gets to the level of law enforcement.
So I think there is, a glaring problem that we should really look at to fix. We had some budget monies go into the school safety budget, in 2019. We just got done going through a special budget session where the budget was cut for additional school counselors. So any of those new counselors, I think it was a $2.5 million cut, we're not going to have those services. But even then, that amount of money didn't feed that need that schools have to have social workers providing those intervention services. So I think that if we really stop and make that investment, it solves the school safety issue. It solves that early intervention. It really gets to the heart of why young people have so much interaction with school disciplinary folks, including police officers, at such an early age.
And the argument within school districts and educational institutions in general is, of course, there's a safety issue. Of course, we've had multiple school shootings, which is one of the reasons why we have so much more law enforcement at our schools. Do you see a balance there? Do you think there needs to be some law enforcement, or do you think there is a model where no law enforcement whatsoever in school districts?
There are a lot of studies that show that police in schools actually leads to more gun violence, where we have, particularly in schools that have a population that's primarily Black or Brown. We see that when there are school resource officers, they're more likely to use their firearms on campus against students, when the entire argument is to use those weapons against people who are coming to perhaps attack a school. It certainly weighs in favor of not having school police. There's really no categorical evidence that really shows that having more campus police increases student safety. It really shows the opposite. But what there is plenty of proof of is that if we invest in social workers, in school counselors, in early intervention treatment services, and start meeting the recommended ratios that experts have called for nationally, that increases school safety at a much higher proportion than having law enforcement officers, which really has only shown to be negative by shoving kids from school for minor disciplinary actions into police custody for maybe talking back or for engaging in other, low-level behaviors, and then they're taken out of school, they're suspended, and that affects their long-term ability for success and their ability to remain out of the criminal justice system in the long term.
Middle school years, I was suspended several times for behaviors that I couldn't even tell you. Like, I still don't understand why.
And for you, in middle school, I know that was multiple years, ago. But I mean, what does that mean? I mean, when you have a teacher that immediately is calling school resource officer, school police, really. And they're now coming to your classroom. Like, what position does that put you in? Like, take me back to when you were that age. I mean, where are you at that stage?
It just kind of creates like disengagement with the classroom. You don't want to go back to that class. You don't want to talk to that teacher. You just don't want anything to do with that, because it's like, okay, now the police are involved when I don't even know what I did. Like, what happened? What did I do? And you don't want to explain it to me. So now it's just like, every time I see you, it's kind of just like, what's going on? Like, I don't really know what to say to you. I don't really want to pay attention to you anymore. Yeah. But you still have to teach me, and now I can't register that information the way I'm supposed to. And so now I might not be able to get the education the way I'm supposed to get the education.
Let's talk about the school itself. Are there things that you saw that you just thought were wrong, the way that they were potentially treating, as far as discipline goes, or even teaching within the classroom? Are there things that you saw that you think can really be improved at your high school?
At my high school, I feel like that could be improved is the teachers getting more involved with the students, as far as like if you see that you have a student that's struggling a lot in your class, I feel like that teacher should get involved and see what that student needs to be able to pass their class. I feel like a lot of teachers didn't care whether their students were failing or not. If they had problems, I just feel like that they didn't care about that student passed, and they just like, okay, well, they fail.
And in my own personal experience, we were given like a lot of busy work. So just work to give you, to keep you busy. I think instead of giving us some of that busy work, you could probably pull a student into a class, try to have a conversation with them, and see where they're coming from. See why maybe they're causing so much disruption. Make sure everything's good at home. Make sure that everything is just good enough for school. Because sometimes you can't focus on school when you have all these outside things trying, messing you up, like in your brain.
How important is it to have teachers that look like you and come from your background? How important do you think that is to how engaged you are in a class?
I think it's pretty important for those who don't come from a two-parent household, because you're always looking for that sense of validation, that sense of a person that looks like me. Like, if they can make it here, then maybe I can make it here, right? Because all the while growing up, you're probably hearing like, you're never going to make this, you're never going to make that because you look like this or you act like that. And so if you have a person that looks like you, talks like you, understands where you're coming from, he can kind of, or she can kind of put it in your head a different way than say someone who looks like you can. Although you probably understand, it's probably not, you don't know a way to put it in words for the student to understand.
When we talk about access and opportunity in general, we look at how students of color and or marginalized students don't show up in the curriculum, right? They don't see themselves mirrored in schools.
When money's tight, districts are not able to fully replenish their curriculum. So I think a lot of schools are using old curriculum, and our old curriculum is not reflective of our African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American. It falls short in many regards. And for kids who go to a school building where everybody loves everyone, but nobody looks like me, not one teacher, no administrator, and even the curriculum we're using, the books we're using, the problems you're giving me don't look like me, then pretty soon kids begin to think there's something wrong with me. I don't fit here. And I think that's so important.
Our district has invested a lot in career and technical education programs, career technical academies, or magnet schools, and things like that. The students that you're dealing with, are they engaged in, and do they see a path forward where if they're in a career and technical education program, that means a livable wage, that means a different way of life?
Well, here's the interesting standpoint, because this district, from my perspective, and I sat on the Superintendent's Commission on Equity recently, and some of the things we learned from there was that there's certain math classes that aren't offered in the urban core. When that math class isn't offered in the urban core, that child is not eligible for a magnet program. That child doesn't even know he's not eligible. That parent can't even advocate for a program that they don't even know exists, because they're relying on this inner city principal, and I don't want to blame it on the principal. It's not their fault. It's the system's fault. The system's working exactly how we designed it, right? To keep the haves with the haves and the haves without, and the have-nots without. And we can argue that, and we can philosophically discuss that till we both turn blue in the face. The fact of the matter is that kids in the inner city do not have access to those classes. They don't have access to the magnet programs, which limits their ability to access probably college scholarships, to access educational and vocational programs.
Well, first, I think we should allow more Black students into higher income or more prestigious schools. Because technically, I go to the number one school in Nevada, right? But I don't see that many Black kids there, especially in my honors and AP classes. There's been multiple times where I've been the only Black person or the only Black woman in the room. So I think first allowing more Black students into these schools and into these classes would be a great step into showing, like, killing some of this implicit bias where it's like, okay, maybe the news or my family or TV has told me that Black people act like this. But I know these students, I know these teachers, and they don't act like this. They're smart and bright, and I see them very talented in my face instead of just like whatever news says or whatever TV says. And I think we should include more Black teachers for not only that Black students have a place to go to feel more comfortable talking about their issues, but the Black teachers can then talk to their white or Asian counterparts and be like, hey, I don't like how you teach this, or I don't like how you do this with your students, or maybe consider learning more about this subject.
We have lots of initiatives that says we're going to bring more diverse folks from diverse backgrounds, right? Teachers of color, leaders of color into school spaces. But once they're there, then what happens? Once the policies have been shifted, then what happens? We have legislation that's changed, but we haven't changed mindsets, right? So you can't legislate yourself into equity, just like you can't discipline yourself, right, into a just culture and community.
When you look at our state legislation too, is it kind of the same prediction here that it takes years to kind of turn the boat, so to speak? This isn't something where 1 or 2 legislative sessions we can make the reform we need. Is this a multi-year, multi-decade process for us?
I think it's a multi-decade because we're a legislative body that meets every other year. It's going to take us even longer. And I think we've seen, in my time as of late, we've seen some great strides in the legislature, in my opinion. People have been able and willing to have courageous conversations around implicit and explicit bias, around breaking the school to prison pipeline, juvenile justice reform. Those conversations were not happening 10 years ago.
Let's talk about solutions here. Is this just teacher training comes up whenever we have a conversation like this? It's potentially more teacher training, implicit bias training. Is that the answer here? Or are we looking at something that's a lot greater than that?
Well, first of all, I don't think that you can train away bias. Bias is something that's cultivated systemically because of the messages that we get over the course of our lifetime. But what we can do is provide people with powerful dialogic experiences. The first experience is we have to embrace our diversity, right? We have to create spaces where we can listen to each other. When our students are telling us about their experience, we can't dismiss it. We need to listen to it. As we can't embrace the fullness of our diversity if we only focus on representation. Representation is an excellent start. We need to have diverse folks at the table. And when I speak diversity, I'm not just talking about physically or visually. I'm also talking about conceptually, in terms of our paradigms, our approaches to problem solving. We have to have diversity at the table, but then once we have it there, once we have that representation, we have to be willing to hear what folks have to say. And we have to be willing to talk about systemic inequities. If we can't even talk about it, if we can't name it, we can't look at the data, first reveal the data, look at the data, analyze the data, talk about the data together, and then develop solutions that includes all of our voices, then we can't solve the problem. In terms of professional development, though, we do believe that we can create professional development experiences. It's something that we do as part of Code Switch. We use a restorative justice education framework. It's transformative in that we focus unapologetically and intentionally on social factors such as race, class, gender, ability, sexuality, right? Gender identification. And we talk about those things. We talk about creating spaces where you can get comfortable being uncomfortable. So it's not a space where we make people feel comfortable or safe, but it is a brave space to make mistakes around diversity so that we can shift our paradigms and come to, some kind of culturally sustaining and culturally humble practices. So we do believe that it's possible to create these ongoing experiences. One-time trainings won't work. Continued experiences that focus on changing our climate and culture, relationship building, community building, connection, and then problem solving together through a cultural wealth, that works.
And Tanya, and if I'm hearing you correctly, because this is such an inclusive collective mission, students then play a huge role in this. And then educating and empowering students then to be, of course, as you've said, the change makers here. Somebody that's able to provide these inclusive experiences throughout the whole classroom or throughout their whole school. Am I hearing that correctly?
You're absolutely hearing that correctly. So our mantra is that we don't work to save children, which is what many programs like ours do. We don't work to or for students, we work with them. So our goal, and we're adults, we live in this world, so we make mistakes, but our goal is to work with youth and to listen to what they have to say, to help them tap into the power they already have, we don't speak the language of empowerment. We speak the language of empowerment, teaching them to reach into their power, and then hopefully equipping them with the guidance, support, and some of the tools that we've learned along the way so that they can be change makers themselves, because ultimately we can't go to school for them.
What can we do as a community to be more engaged, more inclusive to what's going on with our most disparate communities and students?
Well, I would say the first thing we need is, and Molly from Big Brothers and Big Sisters, yells at me about this all the time. She needs mentors. She needs them today. So if there's something that somebody watching this program wants to do today, become a mentor. Get involved. Walk around your streets and engage children. Care about children. They're not just my children. My 4 boys that are at the house are not just mine. Every friend that they have belongs to me. Every person they meet, everywhere they go, those are all my children. The 2,500 children that exist in my probation system, those are all my children. I have to take ownership of them because this is my community.
Well, thank you for joining us this week on Nevada Week to conclude our 2-part examination of racial injustice through the school to prison pipeline. If you would like more information about any of the information discussed on this show, please visit our website at vegaspbs.org/Nevada-Week. You can also always find us on social media at Nevada Week. Thanks again.